In the last 6 years, I've taken 2,000 sales calls and closed $3 million for my agency. But prospects only started saying yes once I knew what actually worked. If back then I knew these 25 sales lessons, I would have been way more confident on calls, closed twice as many deals, and scaled my businesses way faster. Let's start with lesson one. Lesson one is sales is not a chit chat, it's a performance. I meet so many business owners who turn up on calls without a game plan. They just start chatting to the prospect, and before you know it, an hour's gone by and nothing's happened. You've got to understand that from the first minute to the last, sales is a performance. If you're not in control of what's happening and you're not dictating every single step, then what's going to happen is the prospect's going to lead you down their line, and ultimately that means that you are not the expert. You are not the person that's going to be able to ask for the money when it's the time to close. So you need to show the prospect that you're the expert, you've got the process, and ultimately if you do that, when it comes to the time to, do you want to work with me, there's going to be a much higher likelihood for them to say yes, because people who are busy, people who don't have the time, respect business owners that have dialed in processes because it's valuable, it's effective, and they want to work with professionals. And the most important thing in sales is conviction, and you get conviction by preparing more. And that leads nicely on to lesson two, which is first impressions always last the longest. Humans can judge character within an eighth of a second. And if you make a bad first impression, it takes 8 subsequent positive impressions to turn that bad impression around. So make sure that you have a high quality camera, you're in a setting which doesn't have any noise, you're dressed fairly smartly, and you look like you're ready for business, you're ready for action. Then what you need to do as soon as possible is segue in and set an agenda, set a foundation as a professional for the rest of this call. So for example, you could say something like, so Mr. Prospect, on this call today, I'm going to ask some questions. I'm going to understand about your business and see if there's a way that we can help you. So now we've set an agenda, we're in control of the situation. The prospect knows they're part of a process with a professional, which gives us guidance on the call. But there's one thing that we also need to include, and this is a recurring theme throughout the call, and that's lesson 4. You need to get permission and a micro commitment from the prospect. After you've set your agenda, and again, you can use this multiple times throughout the call, you want to ask for the permission to make sure they're listening, they're concentrating the prospect. After you've set that agenda, you'd say, does all that make sense to you, Mr. Prospect? And they would say yes. And what does that do? Well, it's a micro commitment and it gives you ultimate leads so you can run the rest of the call and you can make the most of the time that you have together. If you don't do that, they might lead the call, it might wander off in a weird direction, then all of a sudden the 30 minutes is up and you've not done anything. So once you set the agenda, you get the permission, you get it from their side, and you have then the ability to lead the call and you have the authority. The next thing, lesson 5, you need to do is answer the big objection that's on their minds. Who is this person and why should I trust them? Now, unless you've got a huge global brand and everyone knows who you are, think of someone like Alex Hormozy. If he showed up on a call, he probably wouldn't need to introduce himself. But for most people out there, the prospect is not going to know who you are. So what they're thinking in their mind is, why should I trust this person? What do they do? So instead of letting them guess that for themselves, because it might be inaccurate, we tackle that objection with a small elevator pitch. So as an example, I would say, hi, my name's Nigel Thomas. I built 2 multi-7-figure agencies. And since then, I've helped 300 agency founders scale much faster by using the systems, the network, and the knowledge it took me to build my businesses. And then everything that comes out of my mouth for the rest of the call is coming from a position of authority, which gives you a massive advantage. Not only do they trust you, they're also going to respect you a lot more, which again gives you much better framing for what's happening in the rest of the call. Lesson 6 is never read off scripts. As I've just told you there, for introducing your company, for setting the agenda at the start, yes, you can write these out as scripts, but what you need to do is you need to practice them in the mirror. You need to practice them with a friend or record yourself on a Zoom meeting or a Google Meet or just on your phone. You need to dial these in so you can look straight into the camera like I am to you now and you can read it off naturally, because there's nothing that sounds more salesy than someone reading a script for the first time. And the only things really that you need to quote unquote script is the start of the call to make sure you get that first impression and build that foundation and framing for the rest of the call. The rest of it's just asking questions, and you're going to do a little summary at the end. Lesson 7, the trait of the best salespeople is that they are the best listeners. Now, through watching all of these films, like Wolf of Wall Street, imagine a salesperson in your head. You think of the loud alpha male in the room beating their chest, but it's actually not like that in real life. The best salespeople are the best listeners. They listen, they understand the pain of the prospect, they understand their goals, their challenges, what have they tried before, what's their exact situation, who are they, what kind of crowds do they associate themselves with, what is the language that they use. And because of that, when it comes to actually sell to that prospect, whether it's on the next call or whether it's later on in that same call, they have the ammunition to be able to sell to the prospect specifically in line with their personal needs. So the prospect thinks, wow, it's like this solution is tailored exactly to me. Remember, humans have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And lesson 8 is when you're asking questions, when you're listening, it's really digging in the 5 whys. So most people would just ask a question, and when they get the answer, they would move on. But that's not really where the gold is. The gold is deeper down, and your prospects won't unveil that unless you dig for it. So I'll give you an example. If I said to someone, what's the problem in your business right now? And they said, yeah, we haven't got a pipeline of leads. And then I would say, oh, right, why is that? What are you trying right now? And then they say, well, we're currently using this freelancer. And I would say, oh, right, what's the reason why it's not working, that freelancer? And then they would say, well, they just never communicate or respond to us, and it's really frustrating. And I'd say, oh, right, okay, so how many times a week do you expect someone to respond to you? And then they might say, well, we like to have at least a weekly meeting and a report. Then I'd be like, okay, and is there anything else? And the thing is all that information was uncovered by going about 4 layers deep. And then when it obviously comes to selling to them, I'd say, yeah, we have a weekly report. We pride ourselves on our communication. And obviously I'd only got that because I dug 4 layers deep. Whereas if I'd just said, what's wrong in your business right now? And they just said, we need more leads, I'd just go, great, and move on. I wouldn't have got that real gold that was sitting 4 or 5 layers down. So follow the 5 whys and you will find the real gold, the real pain points, and the personalization that you need to then make the sale personalized to your prospect. Now, lesson 9 is actually using a framework to understand if your prospect's qualified. Now, I believe it was IBM that came up with this, and it's called the BANT framework. So it's an acronym. It stands for budget, authority, need, and timing. So if you get these 4 things, you should be able to make the sale. So budget, can they afford your service and the marketing budget it takes to work with a company like you? Authority, are they the person that can make the decision on whether to work with your company or not? If not, who is? Need, are they a window shopper, or do they actually have a massive pain, a problem? If they don't solve it with immediate effect, it's going to cause a huge issue in their business. And T is for timing. When do they actually want to get this solution in place? And when you're asking your questions to understand and gather information from the prospect, it should be around this framework because it will give you guidance once you've ticked off these 4 things, or even better, you can delegate that framework to another salesperson in your business. And if this sale didn't happen, you can go back and say, were they bank qualified? And if the answer's no, why did they move forward? If the answer's yes, you know that it's actually a problem with the salesperson. And it just gives you the guidance to give your sales call structure. And even better if you delegate that to a sales team. Now, lesson 10 is quite counterintuitive, but it's saying no more. Now, let's say you take people through the BANT process and it turns out that they don't have the budget. They're not qualified for your service. So many people, so many agency owners, they just say yes. Partially, they need the money, but ultimately, they're just very short-term minded. If you say yes to everyone, you're going to have such messy operations on the back end. It's going to be so hard to scale. Your team members are going to hate working for your company, so they're probably going to leave. You're going to have clients that just don't pay you very well. They're always demanding crazy things. And ultimately, you're going to be trying to serve everyone with everything. And that will mean that you'll be a complete generalist. You won't be able to increase your prices, and you'll be putting fires out left, right, and center, because in the same amount of time, you could have just said no and then focused on people who are exactly the same avatar with the same specialized service. Your team loves working with them. You can increase your prices, you can get more testimonials, more referrals, and you can scale a lot more systematically. The other thing is because no one else does this in your marketplace, you'll gain a lot more respect and you'll actually become a lot more in demand. Now, number 11 is tonality. Let me ask you a question. When's the last time that you learned or practiced how to speak? Probably when you were a child. And who taught you? Probably your parents, right? So they probably didn't teach you to use the different tonalities in your voice. Sometimes you want to speak quieter to get your prospect's attention. Sometimes you want to be bold, be very assertive, and make a point. But the biggest tip that I can give you is to remove filler words. Talk to a friend and say, every single time I say like, I say I say are, then correct me on it. And instead, just use silence and be okay and be comfortable when you pause. And you will stand out tremendously because no one else seems to do this. Now, number 12, which is closely linked to tonality, is body language. Communication by humans, 80% of it is done non-verbally. But as you can see here in this video, I'm using my hands. I didn't used to do this. I always used to keep them under the table like this, but ultimately it's better so you can express yourself. It guides your prospect, and again, it gives you more authority, and especially if you both have your camera on, it will keep the attention of your prospect and they will remember what you are saying. Lesson 13, this is one that I need to try and remember more, but is smile when you speak. Because if you smile when you speak, even if you've not got your camera on, your voice sounds so much different. As Robert Cialdini said in his book Influence, likability was one of the main principles of persuasion, and a lot about being liked is just smile, because most people don't. I'm from the UK here in Britain, and it's always raining. It's not, by the way, but that's what the consensus is. You put a smile on your face when you're on calls, you'll be amazed at what kind of impact it can have on the sale. Number 14 is managing your time. Now, again, I related back to the whole chit chat scenario. You've got to get an agenda in. We're going to ask our questions. We've got to have time to close a call if we're doing a one call close, or set up another call if it's just a discovery call. But you need to be in control and manage your time. You need to have a stopwatch there. You need to have a clock. But ultimately, you never want to get to the end of the call and you've not had time to close the deal, and then you say to your prospect, oh, have you got 5 more minutes? And then they say, sorry, I need to go to my next call. That is the worst situation possible. If you've got 15 minutes left and you do need to run over a bit, ask your prospect, can you stay 5 to 10 minutes? And if they say no, you know you're going to need to miss out on some things so you can speed up and get the important parts ticked off. Number 15 is always summarize the point of your prospect. So especially at the end of the call, your prospect's going to remember the first thing and the last thing, usually what happens on the call. So what you want to do is summarize what was talked about. So Mr. Prospect, you know, as you told me, you want to triple the size of your business within the next 6 months. Right now, you're struggling to get a more consistent pipeline. You've tried X, Y, and Z, and you want help installing X kind of system. Is there anything I missed, or is that correct? And then they go, yes, fantastic. So now what you've done is you've just summarized everything that's happened, so they know that you've listened, which builds a lot of trust and respect. And then also, it gives clarity on what the next step can be. So then you can easily segue in to go, right, so let's get that next call booked in right now. And it just gives you the authority in the process. And again, the prospect feels like they're in with an expert, a professional who's done this 100 times. Number 16 is something I took way too long to learn, which is selling against value. Now, I always used to put these sales decks together, and it used to get to the pricing page, and I will go, right, Mr. Prospect, so the cost of our service is $5,000 USD. And then they will kind of turn around, they would think about it, they'd either go for it, they wouldn't. But the thing is, at that moment, they're looking at my service as a cost on their balance sheet. Whereas when I switch to selling against value, what I mean by that is understanding what is the value for them. A lot of the times, if you're a service-based business, a marketing agency is going to be adding more revenue to their business. Prior to the call, if I've done a forecast using all the data that I've got from previous client results and understanding the questions I've asked on the discovery call, I might be able to understand I can make an extra $1 million for this prospect in the next 6 months. So on the slide before I reveal the price, I would then show them a diagram of a forecast with how I'm going to make them an extra $1 million. Now I'd ask them if that makes sense. And they would say yes. And once they do, then I go to the pricing page. So now they've got anchored in their minds, I can make an extra $1 million within the next 6 months. And then once I go to the pricing page and I show them that's going to be $5,000 a month, then it looks like a no-brainer. Lesson 17 is price anchoring. So agencies always ask me, should I have one price or should I do packages? And the answer is always packages. Now, the biggest and the best companies in the world, a lot of them software, there's a reason why they all do packages, because it's psychologically proven that the average order value, the average amount that someone will spend with you will be higher. Think about the car, the BMW. It's a great car in its own right, fairly expensive. But the thing is, if you put that next to Bugatti Veyron, then it looks like a bargain. And if you literally just include an option that's 5 times more expensive than your current service, you can even increase the price of your current service and you'll still probably make even more deals. Now, lesson 18 sounds quite simple, but so many people that I've worked with don't do this. And it's asking for the close. When you're at the pricing page, when you're talking about the next steps, a lot of salespeople, they will literally just wait for their prospect to go, yeah, right, let's move forward. When can we start? But most of the times, the prospect's just going to say, okay, I'll get back to you via email. You have to be the one proactively. If you've done the research, you've taken the time to see that you can definitely help this person or this business, you need to be the one who says, right, are we ready to move forward? We can definitely help you do X, Y, and Z, and we look forward to building a long-term partnership. Our team want to get started as soon as possible. Get the onboarding and the calendar. These are the next steps. Are you ready to get started? Lesson 19 is with objection handling. When the prospect says, I need to think about it, or I haven't got the finances right now, or I need to speak to my business partner. I'm sure you've heard them all before. What you need to do is you need to isolate the objections. So if someone says, yes, so it's just a little bit too expensive for me, then you basically say, okay, so just to understand, Mr. Prospect, apart from the financing, everything else makes sense and you're ready to move forward. Is that correct? And then they say yes. Then at that point, you can either figure out a solution for the financing, or you can just say no and move to the next person. But at least you know you've got the clarity, you know what it is you need to solve to get that deal over the line. There might be something else there. Then they might say, oh no, it's also that I need to speak to my business partner. So then obviously you need to isolate that objection as well. You get all the objections together, so you know either on that call or on a follow-up call, you know what you need to solve to get that sale over the line. It gives you and the prospect that clarity. Lesson 20, in line with the objection handling, is when a prospect asks you an impossible question, you respond by asking them a question back. So you're the founder, you've built out a team, and then the prospect says to you, so when we start working together, will we get the time to work with you specifically? And the thing is, if you answer that question, you either say, yes, you will, then obviously you've just committed all of your time, which the reason why you delegate in the first place, you need that time back. So that's not a good situation. Then the other side is you say no, and then that person's going to be like, well, we want to work with you, the founder. In that situation, instead, you could just say, curious, what's the reason you want to know the answer to that question? And then they might say something like, well, we've had a lot of experiences in the past where, you know, we spoke to the founder and then they've just handed us off to a junior person. So then in that situation, you could say, I'm glad you explained that. And then what you can do is answer the objection by saying, the thing is that we hire only people with 10 years of experience. So actually the person you're going to be speaking to, John, he's actually even more qualified than me. And lesson 21 is empowering your prospects with language, which is kind of like labeling. When you're coming up to closing the deal, you can say, so Mr. Prospect, from what we've spoken about so far, I'm assuming you're the kind of person who makes a quick decision, who's an action taker. So with that being said, should we get started next week? Especially for a guy, he'd have to then downgrade his ego, his status, which men don't really like doing that, to confront that objection, to be like, well, no, I'm not an action taker. And again, you have to make sure you're not manipulative with this, right? But if you know that you can genuinely help this person, you've done your research, then it's in your best interest and their best interest to give them a reason to push it forward. And using languages, you're an action taker, you're the kind of person who does X, Y, and Z. You can empower them using this language, and ultimately both parties will get to the desired situation in a shorter time frame. Number 22, and this is huge, is always book another call at the end of each call. Let's say you get to the end of the call, you've done your objection handling, you've asked for the close, but they still say, look, I need time to think about it. What you want to do is say to them, look, Mr. Prospect, completely respect that. Just like you, I like to make long-term decisions and have a bit of time to think about it. So let's stay organized and do this. We'll book in a follow-up for 3 days. So you've got time to think about this, talk to X, Y, and Z and your team. And then what we can do is we can come together. You can ask me any questions that I'm sure you're going to have. And at the end of that conversation, hopefully we can find a way to move forward. So are you available at, and don't even wait for them to say yes or no, just give them a few times. And if they object to that, you can say your email inbox is busy, my email inbox is busy. To save us both the time chasing each other via email, let's just book in a 10-15 minute catch up, and we can make this easier. I've done this so many times now. It nearly always works. It ties your prospect back in, and it will massively help increase your close rates. Oh, and a pro tip is get them to confirm the call in their calendar. That increased our show rate by over 50%. Lesson 23 is once you've actually made the sale, there's going to be buyer's remorse on their side, especially if it's a high ticket, $5,000, $6,000, $10,000. They're going to have some pushback. That's a natural human reaction. Wow, did I make the right decision? What if this doesn't work? And that is the critical time when you can either gain or lose this person's trust. So what you need to do is as soon as possible, give them something. So for example, if it's your onboarding process and the next step is getting them into a Slack group where you can communicate with them, you want to do it instantly. Set up an automation, give them a thank you video, get these things set up. So literally, as soon as they made the payment, boom, it's there straight in their inbox. And they're like, wow, that was quick. And then it's a positive association to reinforce that they've made the right decision. So a small action for a massive upside further down the line. Number 24, and you do have to be a bit more experienced to this one, but if you've had a really good prospect, you've closed the deal and it's pretty easy and they're just very bought into what you're doing, just ask them for a referral straight away. And you can give them some sort of a bonus. If you're offering a certain amount of one-to-one calls, offer them some extra one-to-one time, for example, or do something extra in your service and say, do you know X person who's like you? Because we want to build our company with the similar type of founders. If you're willing to do that, I'll do X, Y, and Z for you. And just ask. Again, you don't ask, you don't get. You will be surprised. And then lesson 25, and I have saved the best one till last, is stories. For the last 50,000 years, whether it's orally, whether it's verbally, or now obviously visually, humans have been communicating via stories. That's how we remember things. So when your prospect throws an objection at you, use an example of someone who was in the exact situation they were in and how they turned it around working with you. When you're talking about your company, give a reason, give a mission, maybe give some vulnerability. One of the reasons I started my company is because I was suicidal and I wanted to build a brand around self-belief, especially for guys who find it hard opening up. That really draws people towards me. We can connect on a deeper level. If you're going to take one thing away, one lesson away from how to be better at sales, it's to be better at storytelling. If you are that person, people will be drawn towards you. It's infectious energy, and ultimately so many more people will want to work with you. So stories, stories, stories. Now my hope is that you use these 25 lessons immediately to start getting more closes on your sales calls today. But if your calendar is a bit dry right now and you don't have any calls to practice on, I actually just made another video right here on exactly how to send cold DMs to fill up your pipeline with qualified deals.